Welcome to From Documents to Dollars. This presentation is a collaboration between LeanLaw and NetDocuments. I'm so thrilled to have Dallin Williams from NetDocuments. He is a kind of a counterpart to me in the sense that we're both actively working with clients, working on the RevOps side, the revenue side of our respective businesses. I'm introduced myself in a second, but Dallin, tell the folks who you are and also tell them, in one liner or two, what NetDocuments does and what its purpose and mission is, and
Yeah,
how long you've worked there and what you like about it.
I appreciate that. Yeah, like you said, my name is Dallin Williams. I've been at NetDocuments for over 3 years now, and it's been great to me. It's a great company, great people. I love meeting with law firms. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm passionate about document and email management, and I think you'll see that from Jonathon and I today. NetDocuments is all about meeting you where you work and helping law firms have one source of truth for their documents and emails. There's so much more than that we'll get into. But if I had to put it into, a little bit of an elevator pitch, I think that's what I would use. Very grateful for the relationship that we have with LeanLaw. It's been just over a year now. May 2025, I think, is when we announced our partnership, and we have a lot of firms that are utilizing that in a really effective way. So appreciate being here.
You're in Salt Lake City, right, at the headquarters?
Yeah, we're based out of Lehi, Utah, which is about a half hour south of Salt Lake City. So I'm in our headquarters here.
Yeah. And the one thing you missed, you've been with the company 3 years, but how old is NetDocuments?
Ooh, 1999. So we've been
Yeah.
around for quite a while.
When you walk into the office, you see I think one of the first computers that was programmed there, a monument to the past. So I'm Jonathon Fishman. I am one of the founders of LeanLaw, and I serve as its CEO. LeanLaw has a simple mission. We want to help law firms be better businesses. And they don't necessarily focus on the law practice side, meaning what the document management, email management, hence why Dallin and I are good partners here. We're narrowly focused around what we call legal revenue operations, that workflow from how you onboard your clients all the way through collections and reporting and everything in between. In today's webinar, From Documents to Dollars, what we're trying to do is not necessarily show you all the features of LeanLaw or the features of NetDocuments, but rather dispel or create the concept of a best in class and how a really tight integration of that life cycle of that client from document management, email management, and all the revenue operations is not just a good way to work, but it's a discipline that actually produces revenue and captures lost revenue or mitigates lost revenue from that. So that's what our takeaway is, that a better together architecture and trying to highlight some moments where our two products work together. So, I love this first line. Most law firms don't have a revenue problem. They have a workflow problem. When you're onboarding clients, a lot of people want to drill down to features and say, hey, well, does it do this feature and that feature? And tell me about, how NetDocs actually works more in a workflow mindset versus just thinking about a specific feature like context in a document.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we want to be the source for the full cycle, the full life cycle of a document. And we go back to our webinar title, Documents to Dollars, like every dollar to law firm starts with a document, right? Whether that's client intake, whether that's receiving a data dump for an opposing counsel, there's all sorts of ways that those documents come in. But the reality is you need a place to put them. You need a way and a system to evaluate them. There's multiple eyes and multiple hands that document gets passed to. And not only that, but most of the time you have historical context on whatever matter you're working on, right? Like the ability to go back and to search for things that you've done in the past that can be relevant now. Document production, the final review, everything that you do from a document lifecycle perspective, NetDocuments, we want to be the source of that. We want to be what gives you the tools to handle that in a really efficient way.
Yeah, if you think about a document actually being the instrument of, how you're interacting with the clients and the work you're doing, when they're onboarding LeanLaw, what we see is we really position LeanLaw and really try to help people understand that you're not trying to get a timekeeping and billing tool. You're really working on a revenue operations platform. And what we're trying to open the scope up and saying, hey, we don't want you just to look at how timers work on LeanLaw. We want you to think about how you engage the client, how you're interacting with that matter during the course of its work, how you're, you're drafting your bills, how you're delivering it, and collections and all the different reporting. And when you put all of those things together and you think about the people, the processes, the tools, that becomes an operational workflow. And when you're talking about yours, like NetDocuments isn't just a repository to store documents. I think that the the most productive users of your platform are really thinking about workflows and how the teams interact and how they do that. And the note here is that if you don't recognize it as a workflow and you keep things isolated, you get what we call leakage. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, but that's where you start to see leakage because you're just working inefficiently. You're not thinking about the whole system. By the way, Dallin, just interrupt. We're very conversational
Absolutely.
here. If anyone in the group wants to ask a question, hey, show me something, just ask in the chat. Rachel from LeanLaw is here and she's interacting with those folks. So when Dallin and I were preparing for this, we love this idea of death by 1,000 cuts. Dallin, what do you hear and see from your side of it, of this idea of where the real sort of leakage happens and the inefficiency happens on your end?
I mean, I meet with firms all day long, and a lot of firms even think that they have a fairly good system. And what it comes back to is they don't really know any different. It's the way they've done things for a lot of years. But I love the death by 1,000 cuts. At the end of the day, what makes your firm special is the knowledge that you've built up over the years. And that knowledge is housed in your documents. And all the time I hear how scattered documents are. Firms are saving documents to 2 or 3 places. I hear over and over again that I have to ping so-and-so multiple times a day to ask where this is or where's that email? Can you send that over to me? Right. And if there's ever an industry where time is money, it's a law firm. Literally, time is money. And they don't realize that 5 minutes searching for a document, you know, 3, 4, 5, 6 times a week, that adds up. And that billable time, that time matters, right? And that time can be not only saved, but put towards a better use, towards driving revenue for the firm.
Yeah, we call it, when you first comment, we call it institutionalizing worst practices here at LeanLaw. They sort of accepted the status quo and they sort of said, well, it kind of works, right? And the key is, as you said, it's looking at opportunities of inefficiency, and that in LeanLaw speak might be a collection rate. They don't collect at the clip that they should. Our top performers are collecting at 95 to 98%, but average around 93 to 95%. And those, 5 percentage points are just, that's work they did. They're just not collecting on. So why? And it goes upstream. The why goes all the way upstream, and it may not be just on collections. It could be on realization. For those folks who know, realization is, did we put it in the system and did it get billed? What's the delta between that? And if someone's not capturing time or someone's fumbling around with the wrong document and send it to the client and the client comes back and doesn't have clear, you didn't have great time tracking and the bill comes back with questions on it, the writing, all of that plays into those death by 1,000 cuts. So you can see some of the things that you see here. And I think the most important thing is that you can't settle for the status quo, right? Inertia will overtake you and you won't do anything. And what I think is really interesting here is a lot of people ask us about AI. And I say that, yes, there's a lot of interesting things to make lawyers more efficient from an AI perspective. That's totally true. But what we're seeing is clients are more thirsty and more opportunistic about data, but it's also disrupting the operating models. And what I mean by that is because smaller firms that are AI centric and being very nimble and very fast, they're doing things very efficiently. Those firms that aren't are really, the ones that have their book of business will ride off in the sunset and do fine, the boomers and the Gen X's. But for the rest of the industry, they're really adopting to the changing business dynamics. And I think that's creating momentum about really embracing some change. I don't know, what are you seeing on your side from that perspective?
Yeah, the same thing. My conversation with firms over the last 18 months surrounding AI has changed drastically. I mean, originally, when it first was catching steam, it was, hey, this isn't for the legal industry. It's not for us. We're scared of it. There's all sorts of things. And now I think firms are realizing that they're going to have to adopt or get left behind, right? So you have bigger firms that have so much workload and a lot of overhead with staffing and different things like that that are trying to gain efficiencies and cut down on staff and some of their overhead costs. You have small firms that want to punch above their weight class, right? I hear that all the time. Hey, we're a small firm. We want a small firm feel, but we want to punch above our weight class. And AI is giving them the ability to do that. The problem is, and I know we're going to get into that a lot more, like AI, most firms have tried AI at this point, but a lot of them haven't seen a return on their investment because your AI is only as good as the context and the data and the source that you feed
Amen.
it.
I,
And I know we're going to talk a lot more about that, but that's been
yeah.
a heavy
Well,
conversation for us.
we'll tee that up. This is still getting into the system. So as we were talking and sort of aligning about NetDocs and LeanLaw, and the reason we're here together, I should have set the stage here a little earlier. Our two applications work seamlessly together. When you onboard a client to LeanLaw, the integration then creates the client matter architecture with all the appropriate permissions into the NetDocs architecture. Their architecture creates all the folder structures and all the downstream functionality. In LeanLaw, you can see the actual live NetDocs environment. We don't think people should use LeanLaw to use NetDocuments, but if they want to look at context in a matter. So we came together because we had clients both respectively saying, hey, we want to see your tool, two tools to integrate together. We want our practice management is document management. And of course, from the NetDoc side, they needed, they're seeing clients asking for a fully articulated, revenue focused timekeeping and billing architecture. So that's why we came together. And that's why clients are liking our two platforms together. So when this is the workflow between our environments, documents create work, work creates revenue, revenue creates cash, cash creates freedom. So I know that sounds really, really basic, but few firms, and we use this phrase, govern the system. So it's a difference of like just having these features versus really thinking about the full life cycle. And so talk a little bit about that, Dallin, on the document side and just some of the governance that firms can get with your tools and how they can not just manage a specific matter, but as a responsible attorney, looking at other matters and understanding that structure and that workflow.
Yeah. To go back a little bit, I love the line creates freedom. And I'll be honest, when I first joined NetDocuments, I heard that quite a bit. Like, hey, this is life-changing stuff. And I was like,
Yeah,
we're talking about document management, you know. But as I've traveled to ABA and ALA and our user conference, we have customers come up to us all the time and say, hey, you've given me time back with my family because we've gained so much efficiency. And that's been powerful to me. So I love the line like cash, which is what we're in it for at the end of the day, really does create freedom. It
yeah.
gives you time to spend with what's most important to you. Right. From a document perspective, the governance aspect, I mean, security is top of mind for NetDocuments and should be for every firm, right? You deal with so many sensitive pieces of information, and we've had firms on different systems get hacked. I've talked to them personally. It's a very expensive thing, but it also hurts their
Mm.
reputation. And it's hard to recover from.
We just
Net,
had I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we just had a
yeah,
client that onboarded from an on-prem tool. I'll say it was time slips and they got ransomware.
yep,
They got, and that completely crippled their business. And they didn't trust they were still dealing with the 2018 question of, do I trust the cloud versus the 2026 question. But anyway, so it's still real, and law firms are vulnerable, thinking their IT state completely disregard their own IT, thinking we're good, and they're vulnerable and they're targets
couldn't
because
agree more.
their law
Yeah,
firms have high cash. There are still
yeah.
vulnerabilities in small law firms.
And NetDocuments never had a breach in our entire 30 years of existence, right? It's something we take very seriously. And I could get really nerdy on some of the encryption levels and why that is, and I won't.
Thank you.
But documents are yeah, documents are encrypted at rest, they're encrypted in transit. But also, NetDocuments is very flexible in your ability to set up ethical walls within your own firm, and conflict checks and some of the things like that have been really powerful for firms as well from the governance side.
Yeah, so the last line there I think is really important. And it's the idea that operational workflow. I mean, really, when we talk to clients that are onboarding, we sometimes really have them map out like what happens when you onboard. What are the actions that happen there? Okay, this is how LeanLaw is going to facilitate that. And then what are you doing with the work? Okay, where are you tracking time? How do you do your invoice? It's like really looking at the regiment of the workflows as a system is so important because it really comes down to these operating models. And then looking and saying, okay, are we good or bad here? Are we realizing it that, are we still doing manual work? Are we less secure? Do we have a potential for leakage? This is looking at that full system to govern it. Keep going. So this is one of my favorite slides. The assumption law firms have been told historically that you should buy an all-in-one. Like you should just have one system do all. And we're here to break that assumption because it's 2026 and that's not how software is built these days. And it differs for different firms, but talk a little bit about your thoughts. I mean, that the all-in-one and how you fit into some of those and the redundancy versus, and I'll speak to it on my end.
A lot of my time on a day-to-day basis is spent meeting with firms that are currently on an all-in-one system. And in fact, I was on with a managing partner out in California yesterday that was on a, very reputable and common all-in-one system. And he said, it's a jack of all trades, master of none. And I hear that phrase all the time. And I think that's probably the best way to put it. Document management specifically for all-in-one solutions it's an afterthought, and it's there so that these companies can market as an all-in-one solution because it's appealing, right? Firms want a one-stop shop and they want to try to condense their tech stack. What they don't realize, and I think one of the big takeaways of this webinar is that because of the integration with NetDocuments and LeanLaw, it can feel like an all-in-one solution. Like NetDocuments is built directly into LeanLaw. It can feel like that, and it can even be very, very comparable, if not a little bit cheaper on the pricing side many times. On the flip side, you have two specialized best-in-class systems, which sets you up way better in the long term to be efficient.
Yeah, I want to bring in a statistic. So I just did this research, and this is coming from Clio and all-in-one, that when you have small mid-sized firms, over 80% only use 38% of the features. So when we get to a very small micro firm, like 1 to 2 people, and all-in-one's awesome because essentially it's a personification of how they want to work. The minute you start to get to more people, what you're doing is you're compromising really critical functions for the idea that the all-in-one somehow is going to have everything in one place. And I'll give you a specific example from what we just saw. A firm just came from Clio to LeanLaw, and they were blown away that said, you have this compensation tracking feature, you have these reporting features, while you have this automation and integration with electronic payments. And really what that translated to was they were attracted to a tool that was really speaking to revenue operations and has 10 years of technology development refining all of these critical workflows. When they were in Clio, they weren't using 80% of the features, yet paying almost like 40, 50% more than LeanLaw. And then they were using a very inferior timekeeping and billing function. So when they came to our tool and said, wow, look at all this cool stuff, it's because we focus on that. And the other anecdote that I'll give you is I was talking to another law firm and he was saying, he was kind of going down the one system for this and one. And I said to him, it's not that you have too many tools, it's that the data doesn't sync. The data doesn't flow. And that's exactly what we've solved with NetDocs and LeanLaw. You can go to LeanLaw and you'll see that NetDocs information, right? It's right there front and center. You onboard a client's one set of data. The same goes with QuickBooks. So when you look at the feature and you think, your productivity, this is the stack that we see these really competitive firms that are, I wouldn't call them boutique, but they're really, they're mids and small mids and micros that are saying, here's the stack that I want to use. Microsoft 365 productivity, NetDocs for all the documents, workflow, and intelligence, LeanLaw for revenue operations, QuickBooks for their back office. That's the core tools. We have worked with Billables AI if you want automated time tracking. We have an open API. People are now linking our tool up to all sorts of other engines. But this is where firms are going. They're the all-in-one is I think going to be displaced with a future of a very specific AI-centric, AI-enabled tools like LeanLaw and NetDocuments that are connected through smart, what are called APIs, secure connections.
To jump into that, something you said really stood out to me, right? I hear that all the time too. They use in a Clio or my case is an all-in-one system, but we documents in OneDrive and we have Dropbox to send our big files out, and we have this and this and this, and you start helping firms list this out, and they're like, oh, I thought I was getting an all-in-one system, and I really have 8 systems to try to accomplish these workflows, right?
Yeah.
So I get the draw to it, but the reality is the reality, and it's tricky. It's a tricky thing to navigate.
Well, and you've seen clients put their documents in an all-in-one system, and and then have to come back to you and say, hey, we made a mistake.
all the time.
And
Yeah.
that's a bit of work, right? To extract it out and rebuild it. So we think that you should always invest in the core tools. Your documents should never change. Your accounting should never change. Those are just anchor places, and using tools like LeanLaw to glue them together. So this is what an enunciation of that stack here, where you're getting matter intelligence, both in LeanLaw and NetDocuments, but LeanLaw has a series of KPI dashboards and strategic reporting around the financial health of the financial status of a matter, the velocity. It goes into firm metrics, partner metrics, client matter metrics. It's highly customizable, but we always use always enunciate those core APIs. QuickBooks Online is that accounting system of record. It's the general ledger, also modernizes the back office. I remember referring a client to a spend management tool called Ramp, and it blew their minds as to how they were handling expense management, not accounts payable, but just the credit cards. LeanLaw is the revenue operations that handles that entire financials. I'll let you talk to the document intelligence of NetDocs.
Yeah, and that's a word I haven't really hit on yet, but the intelligence part of the documents. Like I mentioned, your your knowledge is your power, and your power is housed in your documents, right? But going back to my statement before, there's a difference between just housing documents and having your documents work for you. And NetDocuments gives you the ability to have, instead of taking your documents out of NetDocument or out of your document management system and take it to some sort of AI tool, NetDocuments allows you to have AI sit on top of your documents, sit on top of your repository of your knowledge base, and have them work for you. You know, precedent, historical contents. There's all sorts of things that we could go into. That's where that intelligent piece comes in. It's not just about housing documents. It's about putting those documents to work and setting you guys apart.
Yeah, and the purpose of this slide is really just to enunciate, like, this is how that stack operates when it's working together. These are the tools, and that the data flows uniformly through all the tools. There's no manual work. You're not having to go do something and then replicate that work in another tool. It's our integration, our partnerships that facilitate that one connected environment.
People on this call that even as simple as when they get a new client or matter, right? They'll have to create it in one system and they'll have to go and build it out in their other system. And those are some of the invisible workflows that's taking a lot of time that we're talking about here.
Yeah, this is talking about our interoperability, and I think the theme is every dollar begins with a document. I know that's what it says, but it really does. And the first document that clients send is their engagement agreement, right? And there's a workflow, and then you right behind it, which we didn't capture, but the next thing for our best performing firms is typically a retainer, and our those best performing firms would do a retainer that's evergreen or such that they can rebill it and not have AR. They just have retainer replenishment. So talk about the front end of this, client engagement, matter creation, document creation. We actually create matters in LeanLaw. So typically the client's onboarded to LeanLaw, and then the client matter architecture brings over. But how does that start with document creation and enablement on the NetDocument side?
I love that integration workflow. Like we just talked about, like a lot of firms will have to have that with a new client or a new matter. But net documents can also recognize based on practice area what type of folder template needs to be generated and needs to be produced. Right.
Right.
So typically what this looks like is, hey, we have a new client, we have a new matter. We're going to go and create that new matter in LeanLaw. That's going to automatically create net documents with the same client and matter ID. I'm sure we have people on the call that are ID people and just they don't remember the name of the client, but they always remember that ID number. So if you're an ID person, you can type that in, but it also looks and says, "Hey, this is a litigation or this is a real estate matter. This is the type of folder template that we need." And then when we have those documents that have come in, which they probably already have if we were creating a new client or a new matter, we don't have to go wonder where should I save this into. It's ready to roll. We can save those directly into net documents and have our knowledge base already built for that particular client or matter.
And what's important on the lien law side is we think about the three core operating models of law firms, right? So law firms work in an hourly model. We're talking a lot about that for document creation. They also work in a flat rate or fixed fee model, and then it can work in a contingent model. And across all three models, there are documents. It doesn't even matter what the matter is, there is a document component to it. That's why that workflow happened. So in LeanLaw, when you onboard that client, you're saying, oh, this is a contingent matter, or this is an hourly matter. And it sets billing rules and billing setup downstream from that. So we're always identifying, who the client, what's the matter, the IDs, who originated it with full compensation tracking, practice area. And some of that data then triggers into some of the intelligence of how it's set up in NetDocuments for that. And what's important is that when we mess this up, or we don't do this accurately, that's the beginning of leakage. That's where it starts. So leakage and inefficiency starts at client engagement. Do they take a retainer? Do we set up the right billing terms? Did we set expectations for payments? Right? That's where it starts, because that's your best opportunity to set the playground as to how you expect to be paid. Then inefficiency and leakage can come from, as Dallin just talked about, that matter creation. We created LeanLaw. Then am I replicating another tool? Did I create the right folder structure? Did I notify the right people? All the different things that we automate. Then through the instance of document creation, how are we tracking our time? Where's that revenue leakage? Are we wasting time? And that all that up front before we even get to billing is where those operations happen and where we either become more efficient and gain velocity, or potentially lose velocity and lose time to money, or have revenue leakage. And that's what we're that's the biggest note I can give in this presentation, is that when these workflows are executed correctly, you're mitigating leakage by increasing velocity and intelligence.
And this is tough, right? It's a tough concept because at the end of the day, like attorneys went to law school, not business school. And so the whole thought of developing a tech stack and identifying leakage and like it's foreign to a lot of legal professionals, I would say. And I think that's what generated this idea of, man, this knowledge needs to get out there. Like firms don't know what kind of revenue they're missing out on by having inefficient and disconnected systems.
Yeah, I think we have a slide later that actually speaks to some of that, like just what the inefficiency, but the root cause, this is the thing. Most layers think they need to grow by adding more layers or working more hours. And certainly by adding more capacity, you're going to have an opportunity to grow. But the real problem, the real opportunity, and it's only a few points, on a lawyer that makes, $500 an hour, and they move their annual collecting rate from, 87 to 90%. That's a 5-figure, like, here's cash in your pocket. And that's what gets changed. So if there's any operators on the phone that are trying to sell a new system, you can't sell it on workflow. You can sell it a bit on security because people are very concerned, but you can't sell it on workflow because many of the stakeholders, the decision makers, will say, well, what we're doing works, right? The status quo, we've accepted it. But when you quantify it and say, hey, I want to move this from X to Y, and we're losing 5-figure, 6-figure money on an annualized basis because we don't have these systems, that gets people's attention. That's what gets attorneys and partners to stop and say, tell me what I need to do to change. And that's what LeanLaw, what we specifically do and how we sell and how we interact with our clients. We put those KPIs right up front. We ask in our sales process, what's your collection rate? And most people say, it's good, right? Let's keep going. So this is the gist. That was a good segue. Workflow problems become financial problems. So this is where we really get into it. Talk a little bit about what you see in the pain points. I mean, I think you've talked about some of this, but now we're getting into the weeds a little bit here, Dallin, about like, where do we see when firms come on to you, what they're talking about in pain beyond security or just overall hosting costs, but really like workflow things.
Yeah.
And then I'll translate some of that into revenue opportunities.
Yeah. Searchability is a huge one, right? Just being able to find documents. It seems like such a simple thing, but a file folder, server-based system, it's really hard to find things. We also run into a lot of bottlenecks on the email side. Man, we need this one email. It's stuck in one person's inbox. They're out of office, and so we're pinging them on vacation, try to get to that email. I mean, kind of more at a high level, and this ties in AI a little bit, but I meet with a lot of firms that have entire staffing groups hired to extract data from documents, right? Like I met with a firm the other day and they get dumped a bunch of lease agreements. And they have staff, they have 3 or 4 staff that sit down all day, every day and go and extract the monthly rental amount. They go and extract the landlord. They go and extract all this data and enter it into the system. And bringing it back to the document intelligence piece, NetDocuments has the ability to point AI to a particular folder and say, let's say it's a lease folder, right? Hey, every time a document hits this folder, I need you to go extract these pieces of information and input it into our system. Well, what does that give the firm the ability to do? Now they have the ability to filter and say, okay, I want to see all my lease agreements that are above $30,000 in monthly rental amount or whatever it might be, right? And it takes the really mundane tasks of those 3 or 4 staff members, and now we can put them on other things that are generating revenue for us. We could go
And
into all sorts of
well,
other things, but those are a
and
couple examples.
but that's something you just said really important. Most people think that by creating workflow automation and bringing in AI intelligence or other, automated tools, that it says we don't need Harry. And maybe that's right. Maybe we can offboard Harry and you're a firm manager or partner, and that's an okay decision because Harry is sort of more, it doesn't have the capacity to do something different and more productive. But most of the time, what you're finding is that now that you take that sort of mundane work, you can up level them and do work that's either revenue generation or at least supporting revenue, process, project management, et cetera. And so that's the opportunity by building these tools. But when you talked about that data extraction, to me, that kind of comes into lost document context, right?
Mhm.
So it may not be a one-to-one, but the idea that, hey, we're underbilling there, or version errors, or we're having to rework things because we had that's write-offs, margin compression because of duplicated efforts or unassigned time, right? So if we're not efficient with our time and we're not getting that in, if we're not doing contemporaneously, that's all revenue leakage. And so all of these things impact these 4 metrics: utilization, realization, collections, and time to money. So when you talk about this workflow efficiencies that you're talking on your side, what you're really saying from the LeanLaw speak is, hey, we're going to become more efficient in our workflows around our production, capturing our time, being efficient, and getting the documents to clients, which is going to in turn create efficiencies downstream in these metrics, which will translate into better performance and more cash, more freedom. Like this is the one-to-one, what you just described. Like you do that stuff better, tie it with a really smart billing system, and you're going to put cash in your pocket, right?
1,000%. Yeah, and
And
what firms miss is I'm so glad you brought up the 3 different billing models, right? Because I hear from firms all the time, "Well, I don't wanna be more efficient with my time because I bill for my time," right? And it's such a backwards way of thinking about things because
yeah,
we're not like there's so much more that you can do with that time. The contingent side of things, right? If or the flat rate, I mean. If we're flat rate, then man, now we can take on a lot more and increase our revenue. Contingent, we're gonna win more if we're more efficient. So all 3 revenue models can be impacted by this,
yeah.
which
I
is
mean, it's
important to
interesting.
remember.
When you think about time in an hourly model, it's an asset, right? It's revenue.
Yeah.
When you think of time in a flat rate matter, it's a cost. Am I
Mhm.
profitable in that one matter? When you think of the time in a contingent matter, it's an investment. I know they think of it as a cost, but it's an investment because everything's on the
That's right.
outcome of the work. And there's different metrics that we need for each one, and there's different leakage or different opportunities to improve it on each one. Keep going. I wanted to go through and actually talk a little bit about like what does this actually mean? We actually highlighted an 8-person firm, and I don't think this one's interactive, but we have others that are interactive on the LeanLaw website. So what does it really mean? So these are all not terrible numbers, right? 90% collections, 3 points in, 90% realization. It's not great, but 90% collections, 11%, that's pretty good. 10 attorneys, $500 an hour, 6 hours a day, 220 days, 6.6 million in annual revenue. Yeah, you run the numbers up and down any way you want to see it, but just a general number. So if we just move 3 points in realization from all of the ideas of workflow optimization, having the tools that do the right job, having interoperability of data, these are things that are really easily attained in 2026. Like, so those are really not difficult to do. We're not saying work more. We're not saying create a new practice area. We're not saying hire new people. We're saying do the same work you're doing, but do it more efficiently. That firm could have put $200,000 in their pocket from a realization standpoint of work they did. Again, this is work that's already in the system. They could add another $300,000 and just getting better at collections. Did we set the client up front correctly? Right? Did we put the right time on the bill? All the things were there. And then lastly, which I think is absolutely one of the most understated metrics, is time to money. And that has two functions. One is velocity through the system from the time we onboarded the client to the time we collect cash, but then also from the time we sent the bill to the time we collected. That is the most undervalued metric because law firms act as banks. And it irritates their customers because of their clients, because they might onboard a client, wait another 30 to 60 days before the first invoice because of when they onboarded them and when the attorney says, yeah, it's time to invoice them. And then another 30 days get paid. So they might do work and 90 days later actually see that cash. But your plumber would never tolerate that. Just the truth. Like there's no plumber that's walking out when the job's done without you paying your bill, right?
That's a good point.
It doesn't, and they're both professional services. I mean, they're often services. Anyway, so this is just something to think about and is one to do from here for any of you on the phone. Thinking if you don't know these numbers, you should. And if you know your numbers, what would it take at the firm level and the partner level? Because LeanLaw illustrates both modest increase in those numbers. And then once you quantify that, then you come back and say, how do we do that? And LeanLaw NetDocs is here to help.
Now we're speaking attorney language, right? Like you mentioned it earlier. Workflows, like most managing partners have their workflows and they're comfortable with it and they hate change. They hate change. They're not going to have the motivation to change because of workflows, but they care about their bottom line. If you can actually sit down and help attorneys map out the bottom line here and sort of the revenue increase, now we have a motivation for change, right? Now we have their ear. All the workflow stuff is great, but turning it into bottom line conversation is where the rubber meets the road.
I'll tell you one anecdote. There was a firm forever that we were trying to have a conversation with because and I'm sure you see this in your company, when folks come onto LeanLaw, they do the change management and then they what I call harden. And we might create all these new features and they're like, we don't want to change. We just want to do it the same way we're doing. We're like, hey, we made a better way to do the thing you were doing. We don't want to change. And this one firm in particular we're struggling because we made a major change and they wouldn't adopt it. And I finally got a meeting with the managing partner. And I didn't even talk about the feature. I said, why do you have this collections problem? What do you mean? I said, well, here's this data. Her eyes opened up and I said, it's a 6-figure number. How do we solve it? I said, well, you're using this old system. I want you to switch to the new system. And I think that'll have a direct impact. Fine. Because it was all about context. So this slide drills down into a little deeper of what we were just talking about in realization. When we think about Dallin realization, again, what we put in the system, does it get billed? The idea of NetDocuments having a better document governance, and then of course, faster time capture, that really has an impact of the things that impact realization. Collections, it's all about time to invoice, meaning how clicking the velocity through the system and get that invoice out, having online payments. I think this idea that now in the majority of the country, the law firms can surcharge, and we're not saying, meaning they should create a fully electronic and modernized way to deliver and collect on their billing. And ACH and credit cards are the mechanism to be paid. Of course, there's some business situations you can't. And the misnomer there is that many folks are like, well, I don't want to pay 3%. Well, you can surcharge and say, hey, you can give them options to say, hey, I'm going to surcharge you on a credit card, but an ACH will do at 1%. And the time to money always will outvalue the fee structures. And then cash velocity is about really trying to compress billing cycles. Our best firms bill twice a month. And some people are like, how could they do that? Well, because it's just not that hard if you created a good system and have a good digital workflow. So these are just some of the ways specifically that impact these numbers and the data that goes through it. Okay, document intelligence. This is kind of what we were going to talk about AI in particular. Yeah. And I think this is important that we talk a little bit about AI ready infrastructure. So I just for the group, what's been the sort of how has AI come to be in NetDocuments and where's it going? Let's just talk a little bit about that because you brought about bringing AI to your documents versus your documents to the AI, but talk about the backstory and tell us where it's going.
Yeah. I think to understand the full impact of it, you really have to back up to our inception as a company. We have been cloud-based since our inception back in the 90s. We've been cloud-based our entire existence. Most document management systems have been server-based or on-premise based, and then the last few years, they're trying to switch their client base to the cloud. Because we've already been cloud-based for the last 3 years, we've been able to innovate on the AI side, which has put us years ahead of some of the competition from an AI perspective. I mentioned earlier that my conversation with firms has really shifted. Instead of being scared of it, the conversation has now turned to, okay, we need to implement it. How do we do it safely, affordably, and effectively? Those are the three words I hear over and over for firms. And the answer is NetDocuments. We have a contract with Microsoft where we have a closed loop system. So, it has a 0-day retention policy. You can bring your documents and your client data to our AI without it being stored on someone else's servers and putting you at risk. The system doesn't learn from what you're putting into the system like most open AI sources do. It doesn't get flagged for human review because of our contract with Microsoft. And so there's so many security and governance elements as well that are impactful here. But NetDocuments has been really flexible and nimble. We've had firms start coming to us and say, "Hey, I'm a big fan of Claude. I'm a big fan of Harvey. I'm a big fan of some of these other tools that have come out." And so we said, "Okay, let us go build a bridge. Let us go build a secure bridge with our MCP connector that's in the works right now. Of however you want to use AI, like let's do that. But at the end of the day, you need the AI to be able to access your knowledge base. You need the AI to be able to have the context to produce the results and the ROI that you're expecting from your AI tool."
Yeah, we call it, it's a very similar concept. We call it AI inside and AI outside.
Yeah.
And for
Very
AI inside, we have the exact same parameters. I think we share the same Microsoft back end solutioning to ensure the same type of security and data privacy. When we think about AI inside in LeanLaw, we think about revenue intelligence. We think about rates, historical information, answering questions. How do we impact velocity? How do we ask simple questions about not just who owes me money, but more context, who owes me money on these types of matters with this type of partner? Things that you normally would have to kind of click and hunt in reporting that you can just ask naturally. But really what we expect as we evolve our AI strategies is to really help the lawyer saying, what is the right rate? Is it profitable? How am I doing against the crowd? On the outside, exact same thing. And what we're seeing a trend in is clients saying, hey, we want to bring our data into a secure environment to then do analytics, and we want multiple systems. We already have an NCP server live in our architecture, and clients using that. We have a full API architecture to do that. So we think Claude and other tools are really smart to mash data together and ask and do more things that we can't code because there's not a big enough need for that one thing, right? So we just said go to Claude and do that. So we're right there with you on that outside inside strategy with that.
And I think something that's important, you mentioned, is AI going to take jobs? And that's a whole conversation for another time. But at the end of the day, we're always going to have the need to do our due diligence as legal professionals and check the production of AI, right? And that's always going to be there. We're always going to want human eyes on this, on what AI is producing. But what I tell firms, and I'm sure you tell firms the same thing, if it can get you from 0% to 70% a whole lot faster than you can, there's extreme value there. There's extreme value in that 0 to 70%.
Well, I think that think about like Claude, MCP server, RevOps, and LeanLaw. I think about all the questions a back office person is being asked by attorneys and how much labor they're putting into, monthly, quarterly, and annual reports. And a lot of that's hunting and pecking. Now, LeanLaw has collated a lot of the data so they can either create a custom report in LeanLaw or they can enter standard reports. But even so, there's a lot of nuance. So we just want to enable people where they want to work and do it in a secure way. but along the way, offer the revenue intelligence for that. I want to get into kind of land the ship here a little bit. Legal revenue operations answers 4 questions. LeanLaw covers the answer. So, was the work captured? Time recorded in the moment of work, time, manner, and billing. Was it billed? Was it collected? And when did it become cash? And I hit this again because, that's goes back to utilization, realization, collections, and time to money. And when you divorce that from NetDocs, when you divorce that from the workflow, you're not seeing the whole picture and you're not impacting it. So when you say, hey, was the work collected? Well, or was it billed? It's not just a question around LeanLaw in particular. It's the entire workflow of how did we onboard that client? How did we set up the client in the architecture? What is the document management, document workflow? So these questions from a workflow standpoint need to look at the full workflow stream. And I think to me, that's the most important thing I want our viewers to get out of that. Any comments on that one, Dallin?
Yeah, something you said just sparked another thought. We hear from firms, one of the biggest compliments to me is that these systems aren't flashy. I hear that all the time. Like I'll do a demo after someone does a demo with Filevine or Clio or Smokeball or some of these other systems. And they're like, well, it's not as flashy as the other systems. And I'm like, thank you, because legal professionals, firms don't use flashy. And that's what the data shows. We already covered that. Like firms don't use flashy. They need specific tools that are user friendly and get the job done. And that's
Yeah.
what we found with this combination of LeanLaw and NetDocuments, right? They're user friendly, they're to the point, they're simple, and they get the job done at the end of the day, which is why firms have been so successful.
Yeah. And I think that again, when people are thinking about buying software, you're not buying features, you're buying
Yeah.
workflows. And they really
Yep.
need to think about that. We talked about this, but the point I would make for most firms is one starting place for AI strategy is the tools that you're using. So if you just use the AI tools in NetDocuments, you have an AI strategy and you have some very specific functions. And I'm going to ask a question in a second to you, Dallin. You then, if you want to go out and use AI in a different way, meaning through an MCP server, a way to get it to a different cloud, you can do that as well. Specifically, tell me what I didn't hear you say is tell the audience the specific features. Like what do people get really excited about in the AI tooling and the value it brings to the clients from a NetDocs perspective?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot that we can unpack there, right? So we have a legal AI assistant that's built directly into the platform. We're seeing firms utilize that for all sorts of things. Summarizations are really big. I get this, 2,000 page deposition summary or deposition transcript. Instead of me having to go through every line, let me put it into this assistant and get a really detailed summary so I know where to focus. I'm still going to go through it, but I know where to focus. I have PI firms that are producing their medical chronologies with AI, just plugging the medical records in and having it templatized. And, instead of spending all that manual time, timelines are really big, extracting timelines. There's all sorts of things that assistant helps with. The auto profiling is what we call the data extraction piece, where, hey, we get this dumps of data and we have AI go through and comb through your documents and pull out the necessary pieces of information to hydrate your documents and enrich your system. There's document automation where, hey, we're doing the same document over and over again. Let's standardize this and use client data tables to produce those documents in a much quicker way. Drafting capabilities, editing capabilities. I mean, the list really goes on from an AI perspective within NetDocuments, but those are high level. That gives a little bit of a summary, some of the features.
Cool. Yeah, and just to summarize it, the question isn't what your AI strategy, it's how's your knowledge governed. And that's, I think,
Yeah.
what you've said many times. Well, I was reminded by our producer that we need to get our act together and land the ship because we've only got 5 minutes left. So it seems like you and I could talk for quite a while here. So let's just run through that. So, you know, it's the to-dos. The one thing I hope folks walk away is realize that it's an operational stack of workflows that then tools support. It's not the features, right? If you start with the features, you've lost the game because you're fixated. Oh, I want a really good timer, or you really need to be thinking about what problem are you trying to solve, and then how do these different tools work together? So where is the product created? How is realization measured? These are all really good, important questions that when you're thinking about making this change, and I acknowledge change is hard, but it's just not that hard in this day and age. You guys have built out set of consultants and partners that can help firms move from where they are to where they go. LeanLaw has shared some of those same partners with you. So it's a lot less difficult than it used to be to move you from where you are to where you need to get to. So assess your operating stack. Can your firm answer these questions? I think that's really important. And really, where does leakage occur? Because every firm has leakage. So where is it? Where's the problem? Even if you can't perfectly quantify, take a stab at it, because leading with data really helps the firm take action and move forward. So I end with this. There is an offer for folks that I need to say. So we have an offer right here. See the offer of an immediate discount if you're interested in buying LeanLaw or NetDocuments, and you can claim the offer. And I believe everyone who signed up got that link. So I just wanted to bring and highlight that to it. Dallin, we're at the end, so I'm going to give you the floor and any parting words for the team here, for the group.
I just think that it's hard to cut out the noise, right? There's so much. I mean, I went to Toronto a couple months back to visit some firms and do some on-site visits, and I think I counted 16 billboards that were advertising software to law firms. There's a lot of noise out there, and I love the fact that, cut out the noise, boil it down to where the leakage is, what your important workflows are, and then find the right tools to solve it. The other thing that I'll plug is please reach out. And even if it's like we're not high pressure salesy guys, even if it's just informational of,
Yeah,
we just
exactly.
want to see what the product can do, that's fine. And if it's not the right fit, it's not the right fit. The answer is we're most of the time we're a great fit for you. But even if it's just to get this in front of you and to increase your knowledge into what's out there, let's do it. Let's set up some time to chat.
Yeah, thanks, Dallin. And I leave with this sentiment that we're here, both of us, Dallin and I, are collectively, individually, are here to help. And we believe in our two platforms together. We've seen it impact it. But most importantly, what we hoped you walked away with today in this conversation is that, many times when you go to buy software, make changes in software, even if you're using your own software, you're focused on the features, and you have to go upstream to that and ask, what problem you're really trying to solve, and what is the economic impact of that? You will never get the buy-in that you need across the whole firm unless you tie together, hey, here's our workflow, here's what we're measuring, here's what it's costing us. If we make these changes, here's the outcome that we think to get. And it derives down to, cash is freedom, but it's joy. And if you get to a place where you're working in your joy, because a lot of people just, you know, don't like their software. But if it's really working for you across the way, it's kind of fun to use, but you get that freedom that we talked about, and that's what we hope and aspire. So, Dallin, thank you so much for taking the time
Yeah,
to
appreciate
to
it.
meet with me. I really appreciated the collaboration. And at this point, I'm going to end the webinar. So, everyone, have a great day, and thank you for attending. And Dallin, be well. Have a good rest of your day.
You too, Jonathan. Appreciate it. Appreciate you
Yeah,
having me.
thank you.